We're going to have a fabulous presentation today that we're quite excited about. And I'm joined today by Nick Usborne. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
And Nick, I'll ask you to put your phone on mute once we track along here for about 20 or so minutes. I'm going to blow through my presentation and leave the floor to you.
All right.
But first I want to tell everybody a little bit about why we're here and why this topic is important. For starters, this topic is brought to you by Idea Launch, which is the parent company for Writer Access and Word Vision and Life Tips and lots of other companies I've started over the years. And we're now really zeroing in on the Writer Access business model that we have and helping not just companies create great content with access to great writers, but we're now trying to help writers create that great content as well. And Nick has been kind to join us today. He's a celebrity on the writer circuit, doing a lot of work with AWA, American Writers Association, and lots of other ventures. I've known Nick for many years now, back in literally like a decade ago when Nick and I were doing basically website audits for companies as part of some work we were doing with people. So it's really great to be back with Nick, and we've got some other things in store with Nick if things go well, including more training and access to taking careers level. Nick, do you want to add anything to that, or before we begin here, or should we just dive in?
Just briefly, because I know that when I watch and listen to people I don't know, I'm never quite sure whether to be honest, whether to believe them. So I just wanted to reiterate the point that you and I have both been doing this for a long time, and what I'm talking about today, in fact, is really based on, I've been a freelancer for 30 years now. Companies large and small, I mean, lots of small, medium-sized companies, big ones like the New York Times and Reuters and Disney, and I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of companies over the last 30 years. So that is what I'm basing this on. I just wanted to make the point, not just to try and say, look at me, but so that people understood that I'm not making this up. This is based on experience over the decades.
Well, I'm making my stuff up, Nick, so I'm glad we're rooted well with you. But I'm making it up with some pretty good experience as well, so that's great summary. So let's dive in, everyone. We're going to try to really blow through quite a bit of information here. I always begin these Content Marketing Monthly webinars with a quick series of slides on what is content marketing. Then I'm going to go into a few slides on the creative brief. What is it? Why is it important to you? How to write it, what do you need to do it and make it work. And then I'm going to debut some screen grabs of a brand new tool that we are launching today, matter of fact, called the Creative Brief Wizard, which is a hope to make it easy for people to express what they're trying to accomplish, the creative strategy, if you will, behind literally a creative brief that you'll be able to create. So we'll get to that, and then Nick's going to go through some creative brief tips and advice in a deck, and I'll pass the baton over to him. So without further ado, a super fast version of what is content marketing. So I think everyone on the line here is fairly in tune with content marketing. It's defined, as you will, as the art of listening to your customers' wants and needs, which, by the way, is the hardest thing to do, in my personal opinion. How do you understand those customers that you're trying to target and or are working with? And then, of course, it's the science of delivering content to them that's compelling and engaging, and there's a big portfolio of assets that you now need to have in your portfolio if you're going to reach people. And of course, catching those customers orbiting at high speeds is very hard to do. You need to think well beyond your website and into mobile, particularly these days, and of course social networks, video. The portfolio just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And if you invest in a diverse portfolio, your chances of connecting with people will be much greater. Another key factor is you need content and information that they want and need, and that's where we're beginning to see a fork in the road with where we used to sell years ago by pushing the features and benefits of our products down people's throats and pushing marketing strategy out to them and beating our chest constantly. That's just not working anymore. nor are aggressive sales tactics and cold calling tactics. It's really all about what our customers' wants and needs. Where are they in their stage of their career? How can you help them get better and improve their insights into what area you're selling within? And that's hard to figure out. And of course, testing becomes an important component now that everything seems to be on the web. You know, I like telling people if you're not testing, you're living in the dinosaur age, and that's actually where Nick and I began years ago. So again, good roots there as part of content marketing. And the key seems to be finding the most efficient path to engagement. And sometimes that's often not producing more content. Sometimes it's just fine-tuning what you have. And so it's a fine balance to really find that efficient path. I love this slide because it really explains what the whole process, and content marketing really isn't a thing or a particular phraseology that makes sense. It's a process, and it's really a whole workflow. Today we're really talking about the content planning process as the preamble to actually creating the content. Particularly when it comes to things like assets, written assets that we're really focusing on today, copywriting, etc. So this workflow is a pretty good summary of what needs to be done. So let's go into the creative brief. And for starters, this thing called a creative brief has been out there for a long time. Agencies, creative people have needed a formal way, if you will, to document the wants and needs of a customer that is trying to reach their target audience and increase their sales. So if you look at some of these bullet points I prepared here, it's really meant to be a foundation that informs a writer or a creative talent on the guidelines for a particular project. That's a topographical overview. But the real key to it, in my opinion, is that it's concise and it's a very quick summary of key factors that will impact the project. We need to know a little bit about the company, about the target audience. We need to know something about the competition so we can help to distinguish the client and the customer from the competition. And we need, to know what the objectives and the goals are for the brand, and where the brand is in achieving those goals. Are they new to the marketplace, or are they, well entrenched within the marketplace? These are important things to think through. But one of the things that is going to be difficult, particularly for customers as they begin creating these creative briefs, which is really what we're trying to do with our creative wizard, is to inspire creative people to do something, and that's hard to do. You certainly want to clarify what your goals and objectives are, but you want to also inspire them to create great copy, and that's the trick, is to not create boring creative briefs that then convey to a creative person that, gosh, maybe there's no room for creativity here. You want to use great words, and I'll talk about that in a second, and you view this as an opportunity to inspire creativity. And of course, you need to work with groups of people. Typically a creative brief is actually developed by the creative team that is working with clients on projects. We're trying to flip that around a little bit and have a customer actually create the creative brief, which is going to create some problems, I'll be honest. And what often happens in agencies, years ago I worked at Hill Holiday, I was the account guy, yet I was putting together the creative brief. And honestly, that made no sense to me. I was coming at it from a marketing angle, almost a sales angle, of how can we make this customer happy and, kiss their butt with great descriptions of their features and products and how important they are. And but really that's not what this is all about. It's not about the selling anyone on anything. This is about trying to gather good ideas, and we'll talk more about that. So, what questions does a creative brief answer? I think these are important things to go over. Certainly, what is the project? What is the task at hand? Why are we doing this project? What's its goal? Is it to increase traffic? Is it to persuade and help people in a certain stage of the sales funnel? What problem is happening in that stage of the sales funnel? Or what opportunity is there to motivate people? What do we want to achieve? What is the end goal? Certainly, who is the target audience, and why should they care about this thing we're creating? Why is this important, either to the company or to the target audience? In that particular question, the target audience. Where and will it be used? And who will it engage, and how will it engage them? Is it a handout? Is it a giveaway? Is it just going to be a static piece on the site? How are people going to get there? Is it supported by pay-per-click? Is it supported by organic only? Are there links to this? Where are the links from? That's an important element that you need to convey to somebody if this really wants to perform to the maximum. And another interesting question is, how will it be remembered and retold? I've done many webinars on storytelling and creating great content and how to do it. But I think retelling the story is something that a good creative copywriter is able to do. And what needs to be done, of course, and by whom and when. In this case, it's more of a particular copywriter that's going to pick up an assignment, but a creative brief may, in fact, be much more complex. So here's some other quick points. What form can a creative brief take? It certainly can be a template form. That's what I'm going to talk about today. But it can also just be a conversation that you have with your customers and happening all the time, and you're having with your creative team. It could be a whiteboard that becomes a session that people are involved in. It could be a war room that evolves over time. Lots of different elements that can happen here. Who should develop it? A customer, a client, a designer, a marketing person. There's lots of different things that lots of different people that can actually create it, as mentioned. And who should use it? Certainly everybody. A writer, a customer, a designer. This is a very important document that everyone needs to agree to and be part of when it's in its final form. So what isn't a creative brief? I thought this was important to talk about. It's not always necessary for simple projects. In many cases, people are coming to Writer Access, for example, with more of an execution mode where they already know what they want. There's a creative strategy. There's keywords that have been identified. There's a quantity that's been identified. And now it's just filling holes and filling buckets. And that is perhaps not always necessary to involve a writer in a monstrous creative brief. But I would argue that, in fact, it's great to know what's going on at every stage of a project being developed. If a content strategy was created, why not summarize that content strategy in the creative brief template that we're going to talk about today, and just let a writer breeze that over. As long as it's easy to read, which we've tried to limit our customers on how much information they're providing and just providing that key information, I think it can be really helpful and help raise the level and the quality of content that's being created. The next point is that it is not easy to create and communicate all the details necessary for performance and impact. These are difficult to do. We're going to walk through the actual creation of a brief, but the net of it is, it's not easy to do this stuff. And certainly, it's not a long summary of how great your company is or your products are. It's not an opportunity to list the products and benefits and features and charts and graphs and really get people wound up as if you're selling to them and your creative team. You don't want to sell your product and service to your creative team. So that certainly is what it's not. And that's my biggest fear, that people will tend to always want to talk about their company and their products as in terms of their great products and services and how they're better than the competition. That's not the path you really want to go down. And it's certainly not an all-in-one document that applies to all your creative projects, which is why you're going to see we almost force you to say this creative brief applies to X, Y, and Z type of assets that are being created. So you want different strategies for different assets. That's the point. So why is a creative brief critical to the creative process? For one thing, it defines and sort of fixes the parameters of the project and allows you to wrap your head around it, if you will, in terms of doing a 20,000-foot view of several of the key points that are essential to understand and to agree upon as a group. Next, it provides an objective strategy that can be agreed upon by everyone that's concerned. But perhaps most importantly, it provides a metric by which to judge and evaluate the appropriateness of the solution. And this is really where Writer Access comes in. We wanted this to be a public document. We want customers to create it. We want writers to read it. We want some back and forth and questions answered and perhaps clarification of this creative brief. But then we want it used as a gauge to measure the success of a particular campaign. And that becomes a really important piece to writer access, which none of our competitors are even beginning to think about. What is creative strategy behind content, and did the writer achieve that goal? So that's what we hope is going to be accomplished with customers that choose to complete this and fill this out. And certainly it needs to contain all the relevant information in a single place. That's frankly the beauty of it. And it needs to really be the driver for a process that delivers a final creative asset. And I would argue that the creative brief in itself is the start of the process of creating content, and that you will hopefully see as well. So some rules for success, every angle is different. People are coming from different angles. Whoever's filling this out, it's going to be, I thought about including on the wizard, who are you that's filling this out, so we can understand what the angle is of where you're probably coming from. But that becomes an important element for you to take into consideration. How brief, can it be? That's an important element. And is it organic and collaborative and inspirational, and not directional and limiting and persuasive? The creative brief should be inspirational for creative people, not limiting too much on in sort of closing doors of opportunity too quickly with how it's being created. And that's a tough art to put that together. And it needs to be brief, as mentioned. I've talked about that enough. It really needs to be written for the creative writer, not your marketing manager. And I think that's an important distinction. I'd almost like to see a customer fill this out and not have it approved by your legal department necessarily, the entire creative brief, if you will, or approved by your boss or the director of sales. This is an inspirational piece. It's if your goal is high quality content and engaging content and something very strong and powerful for your brand and infusing your brand message. Another interesting point is, don't express the hype or believe the hype, right? So stay away from, bringing close to the goals this concept that that features and benefits and how great my company is the driver for the creative brief. Instead, find deeper roots in getting inside the heart and soul of the end customer and the reader. That's the important part of it, not a bunch of marketing gibberish. So so next, have a consistent theme throughout the time brief. Try to be consistent with how you write it. Let the personality of the consumer or reader shine through. That's key. You almost want to be writing this as if your customers would be looking at it and agreeing with you on what's being stated. And the final trick, and maybe it's a tip, and I really look forward to hearing Nick's thoughts on this. Can you and dare you use evocative, unexpected language, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, that tries to bring out some of your brand's personality and how you think of the competition or how you think about your own brand. I think that is an important element here because it opens up and triggers all kinds of creative thinking that a writer needs to go through. So let me talk briefly now about our wizard, which everyone's going to be able to try out and check out and play with. It's new, it's fresh. I don't know of anything like this on the web right now, so bear with us and please give me your feedback and send it to me, Byron at idealaunch.com or Byron at Writer Access. Can't wait to get any feedback from everyone on basically this piece. So it starts out with, it's a 6-part little wizard, if you will, and it starts out looking for a title. I just made up a title, sort of blog writing strategy, and then of course a description of what you're trying to produce. Looking to produce 20-30 blog posts per month, blah 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 blah, and I'm going to check off my content owner's blog posts. So I now zeroed the creative team and/or writer in on exactly what I'm trying to do right from the get-go with a super brief description of what I'm trying to produce. Just very clean, very simple, and that's step 1. Step 2 is telling me a little bit about your company. We put a big blank box that allows you to talk about your company and quickly list your industry, but it needs to be brief and to the point, and who you are and what your company does, and in a very simple, easy format to use. We may look at these descriptions that come in. You don't have to use your name for this. You could use your company name. You can remain anonymous if you want to at Writer Access as you post jobs and orders with writers. But in any case, you need to explain to writers what you do. The brand voice is interesting. These are throttles, if you will. And what we're trying to make a writer understand is, what if your company is a person, what characteristics would they have? You take that little slider and you move it more towards one side or the other to try to create almost a mathematical driven formula with what your company's brand is all about. Now, this is not the content asset. This is your brand. What is your brand voice? And these are extremes that you can read on this slide that express the ability to nail your brand as closely as you can. Next, we look at more company information. Who's your competition? How are they better or worse than you? Certainly cover the basics like price, products, and service. But try to use colorful words like, this is the underdog in the industry, or here's the elephant or the giant. Here's the disruptor, or here's the king of the hill, or these people are a real thorn in our sides. Try, use your own words, blame the competitive landscape, but I think this gives real insight into how you think of the competition as opposed to your brand. And the final section is unique selling points. I would highly recommend you have a read of Seth Godin's The Purple Cow, and try to find some selling points, unique selling points that really are infused with your brand and how you're different and how you stand out from the pack to bring in customers in droves. So just some ideas about your company information. We're trying to not let you talk too much about your features and benefits of your products and look at some other ways to summarize yourself. So the next 3 of 6 is target audience. We really don't have a lot here. We want you to describe your target audience by dropping any facts about your target audience, who they are they celebrities or experts or exclusive or everyone under the sun. We want you to write a little bit of information, but then we want to know about the proficiency level. What's the topic knowledge? We talk about content marketing as our topic, our thought leadership position. Who's the target audience? What is their knowledge level with content marketing? Is it low? Is it high? You get the general idea. And what's the audience mindset? Are they know-it-alls? Are they undereducated? Is it a formal or a festive environment? You get the idea. These sliders, we think, will help put metrics on these distinctions. Next, tone and style, some more metrics there, and we suggest you drop in an actual sample. And I look forward to your feedback on this style and tone section and whether this makes sense to people. And having this throttled approach, we wanted it to be quick and easy. And then a research and inspiration. Tell us about industry publications and sourcing that might be appropriate. Tell us about online references that you think would be appropriate. Any bright ideas that you may have to send people off into the sunset with some creative ideas. And finally, drivers and requirements. What are the drivers for this project? What are you trying to achieve? What are the main objectives of any content that you're creating? Is it engagement? Is it listing positions? Is it optimization? Is it link building? Is it SEO? What restrictions and challenges do you have? And is there anything else? So there ends my piece of the puzzle. I wanted to end with something also quite interesting, which is how do you measure the success of any content you're creating? And I wanted everyone to quickly understand that there are a lot of great ways you can measure success. Certainly engagement, improved listing positions, improved conversion rates, increasing the traffic on your site, looking at user acquisition cost, increasing sales, lots of ways you can measure the success of creating great content assets. So I'm dying for feedback, so please reach out to me at either of these 2 locations. I'll pop this slide up after Nick goes through his deck in a second. I'm going to hand the baton to him. Everyone can go to idealaunch.com/101 to download a free copy of my book. That's yours for free now. Have at it. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over and change the baton over to you, Nick. Give me 1 second. And carry away, Nick. Over to you.
Whoa. Let me see. I've got a... sorry. my screen has changed. Please choose show my screen. Is that what I want to do?
Yes. And then I assume you have your slide deck right up, ready, live to go.
Oh, no.
Do you want me to?
I thought my deck was, I thought you had put my deck in with yours. My apologies.
No problem. Can you pull it up pretty quick, or do you want me to get it for you?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm going to share my screen, and now I'm going to go and find it.
Perfect. Thanks. Awesome.
And then I go to display mode.
Just run your print. Yep. You're just go ahead and run it. Yep. You're good to go. Everyone's looking at your screen. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Okay. Hey, one thing I want to ask you before I start.
Sure.
From listening to you, it seems like we have a mix here of writers, but also maybe 1 or 2 people from the client side as well.
Yeah, probably more than 1 or 2. It's a pretty good mixed audience.
All right.
About a third type of a thing. I'm not sure what the last third is, but but that gives you a rough flavor.
All right. So, okay, what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to kind of look around the edges of a creative brief. And Byron was saying that he's in his agency days he was the account exec. I was on the creative team. I was like the copywriter and then the creative director, and I would receive these creative briefs that did generally come from the account team. And I had a kind of love-hate relationship with these documents because, on the one hand, yes, they gave me the information that I needed to do the work or to work with a team to do the work. On the other hand, I always had this slight kind of, creative people have this kind of resentment that they were boxing me in. But actually, over time, that second part begins to disappear because what I discovered that is, in fact, constraints can actually drive you to be much more creative. It's when you have no constraints at all that you're floating around. And my experience is that what is actually the least creative. Hey, just as an example, it's like, I don't know whether you've ever written a sonnet, but a sonnet, talk about constraints. It has a very particular number of syllables per line. Some lines, it's huge constraints, but you can hardly say that no one's ever been creative with a sonnet. So briefs are wonderful in that regard. Also, I've found the most powerful thing, before I even get onto my next slide, my first slide, is that briefs open conversation. And it's an opportunity for me as a writer, because I write copy, I write a lot of content. It's an opportunity for me to open a dialogue with the client, and very specifically to communicate to them that I've read the brief and that I'm really excited to be working on this. Now, I know you always have that opportunity, depending on the kind of client and the kind of structure of the relationship, to get into a one-on-one conversation. But when you can, there is this magical thing you can do, which is to open up a conversation and say, thank you for the brief. I am so excited. I'm really looking forward to this, and I really want to help you achieve your goals. And I say that because I've been involved in some research as to what clients really, really want. And there were 1 or 2 questions in there that prompted replies from companies that were hiring freelancers saying, hey, our favorite kind of freelancer is the freelancer who is just really into our business and really kind of engages with us and is excited and really, really wants to help. There's one guy, this client-side guy called Jimmy, and he was telling a story of how he had a freelancer who called him on a Sunday afternoon when he was at home and said, hey, Jimmy, I'm so sorry to call you at the weekend, but I was thinking about this job and I was working on it, and I just had this idea. And he was like all excited, and Jimmy was saying to me, he said, I didn't mind that guy calling at all, because the fact that he called me at a weekend and the excitement in his voice told me that he was just really into it. And he said, that is the kind of freelancer I love. What I don't like is the freelancer who gets the brief, never says a word, does the job, invoices for the job 35 minutes later, and follows up on payment 7 days later. He said, I don't use people like that. He said, I love to work with freelancers who ring me on a Sunday afternoon in the garden with my family, because it shows they're into it and that they care. So creative briefs are great insofar as it opens the door to conversation. So I'm going to kind of look around the edge of the brief, like I was saying, and look at some things here. Is that when you have the opportunity, and I know you don't always have this opportunity, but when you have the opportunity, in addition to the template, which is this great starting point and gives you wonderful, Byron, I think what you've got there is excellent, and I love the slider thing, because it's very hard sometimes to put a specific figure on something, but you can at least slide a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. But what I very often do when I've received a brief, or even if I don't get a complete formal creative brief, is I almost always go back to a client and say, hey, look, can you just, like, in your own words, just tell me, just write me an email, like the way you see it. You know, you wrote the brief, I get it, I understand it, and I've taken that on board. But just kind of write me, you know, write me 200 words on where you think this is going and what you want to find. And I do that because when I take the client out of the constraints of the briefing process and say, hey, just tell me. And it may be that I'll record a phone conversation and say, look, can we have 10 minutes and I'm going to record the call because I want to transcribe this. What I'm looking for is the kind of language that he uses or she uses. And very often, that several times over the years, I've taken a line out of this informal description and it's become the headline for something. Or I've taken a sentence or a whole paragraph and it has become the lead paragraph in something. Sometimes when you ask the client to get less formal for a moment and just say, hey, just kind of flow of consciousness, just take everything you put in the creative brief and just put it in your own words. And often that's where I'll find my insight, what the guy is really wanting to say, what they're really looking for. So when you have the opportunity, I know you always don't, particularly on kind of small, kind of, you know, the next of 20 articles or posts or something like that. But when you do have the opportunity, I always ask for this informal edition. I take the creative brief, I get that, and I use that, but I'm also looking for it in the client's own words. And now I've got to work out how to move this. Okay, how do I move the slide forward here?
Click on the presentation itself, and then you can use the arrow button to go back and forth.
Yeah, but how do I move the slide forward? It's not.
Sometimes when you click on the right panel for the GoToMeeting, it gets stuck on that. So you have to go back to the slide deck, put your cursor on the slide itself, like click that.
Oh, really?
And then, yeah, and then you'll be back in the GoTo. Well, yeah. Well, go ahead and now run it. Go ahead and run it. Hit slideshow up top and then run.
Oh.
Yeah, because we're just watching your presentation, so you can even hit F5 and it will launch the presentation in its normal form. We're now looking at your small deck just like you were looking at your small deck.
That's
so
right.
You need to go back to run it.
Run it? What does it say? I'm sorry.
Well, okay, go to slideshow. Go to slideshow up top. Navigation.
Oh,
there you go. Slideshow. One more over. There you go.
Yeah.
And then you could do from the current slide. Boom. Now hit your arrow button.
Oh,
there
okay.
You go.
Now, well, that's what I was used to, but after that first one, I was doing the arrow buttons and it wasn't working.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
Another thing I do for a client, again, where you can, is I ask for samples of work that they really like, and it doesn't have to be for their company. It could be for a competitor. It could be a totally unrelated, unrelated service or product. But I want to get a feel for what that person actually likes in this kind of creative work, and I'll say, hey, you know, if I'm writing a page of content, I'll say, hey, show me some other pages that you really like, that you really think hit the mark. Again, I'm not ignoring the creative brief. I'm just trying to add stuff, and I'm trying to fill out around the edges and get a different viewpoint. And this can be really important in terms of giving the client something they'll be happy with. Because I'll tell you a weird thing, and Byron, you may have had a similar experience, but I've had experience with clients where I've done work which is absolutely spot on to the creative brief, and I deliver it, and they don't like it. And I'm like, but I followed, I followed the brief, and they say, yeah, but it just doesn't kind of work for me. And then you get into this awkward backward and forward thing. And that is, hey, there are all kinds of circumstances where you do the job you're asked to, and the client doesn't like it. In fact, I'll give you it's not entirely related, but just to show you how weird this can get, I did some optimization work with a team. I was part of a team for a company. And we were improving in fact, the homepage on their website. And we thought it worked really well, and the client we were working with thought it worked really well. And then we got a phone call the evening before we were going to publish it. And the guy said, don't publish it, because the chairman of the board had a look at it and doesn't want to run the new version. And we said, well, why not? Because we've done all these tests and it's going to work so much better. And he said, well, the truth is, the chairman was behind the version we have now, and he quite rightly thinks that the new version is going to work better, and he doesn't want to look bad. All right, so weird stuff can happen. You do the best job you can, and weird stuff happens. So it's not entirely related, but I just want to tell you that story to show that sometimes there can be this huge disconnect between what's asked from you. They'll ask something from you, and then when you deliver exactly what you're asked for, it doesn't always work out happily. So if I can, I try to get examples of the kind of stuff that the client likes, because otherwise I know that even if I hit the creative brief, head on, that it still might not please the client. And like I say, this doesn't have to be the same kind of work for their company. It could be for a different company. It could be for a different industry. It's like, hey, here's an ad I love, or here's a website with content where I think they really get it right, et cetera, et cetera. It just rounds things out for me. Explore your content yourself. And again, I work with and I know an awful lot of freelancers, and a lot of them work very hard. And the ones that don't do quite so well tend to be the ones that take shortcuts. And so they'll get a client, they'll get a brief, and often it's not as formal as the one Byron's offering here. And they'll just dive in and do the job, and it won't work out well. And I say to them, I said, well, did you spend time on their site beforehand reading their existing stuff, or did you subscribe to their newsletter, if that's the kind of content they're asking for? Have you been following their blog posts? Do you follow them on Facebook or whatever? And they say, no, I just did what they were asking. And that strikes me as foolish. Again, if you want to truly understand, and this is what kind of gives the depth, the kind of insights into a creative brief, because the creative brief can be a little bit, it's necessarily constructive. It's necessarily, in a sense, that there's a kind of rigidity to it. And this is where you kind of fill in the blanks. So I always, whether for myself or if I'm talking to other freelancers, say, when you're going to work for a client, spend time. If it's online work, spend time across their online channels, read their website, sign up for their newsletter, read their blog posts, look at their LinkedIn page or whatever it is, so that you can get a feel beyond the brief as to the kind of language they use, the kind of phrases they use, how they open and close. Because even when a client isn't aware of it, you as a writer can look at a client's site and you can see stuff they don't see, because you're looking at it from the outside, you're looking at it from a fresh perspective, and they may have become blind to the way they do stuff. Now, sometimes, mostly I look at that and say, okay, I get a sense of how they do it and what they want. And I'll blend that with what I'm getting from the creative brief. But sometimes I'll look at the creative brief and I'll look at what they actually do, and I'll see a significant disconnect. And then I think, I could be running into trouble. So when I have the opportunity, I then get back to the client, and I'm always totally honest about it. I said, look, you say in your brief ABC, but I look at your website and it's saying XYZ. Can we talk about this? Because it troubles me. I don't want to give you ABC if what you actually want to publish is XYZ. And I don't want to give you XYZ if you're going to be upset that I haven't followed the brief that said ABC. So, like I say, I only do that when I see a significant disconnect between what they ask for and what they generally do. But definitely, if you don't explore that content for yourself in addition to reading the brief, you're not necessarily setting yourself up for trouble, but it's trouble you can avoid simply by having a look at their existing content and what they do now. Get them to prioritize their needs. It may be that if you look at the creative brief, the way Byron is presenting it there, you may think, oh wow, they want me to be funny, they want me to be serious, they want me to address people who are knowledgeable, they've moved this slider here, but in a little bit of text they say this, and it's like, what do these guys actually want? And very often the answer is that their audience is actually quite complex, and that they may well have 4 or 5 different types of visitor. And as they go through the creative brief, they're trying to say, hey, they're trying to cover all kinds of different eventualities, different audiences, within their larger audience. When I see that, and whether, I might recognize it in a creative brief of like, whoa, they're trying to please like everyone here, or all kinds of different people here, all the sliders are left in the middle, but there's conflictions in what they're saying here and there. So again, what I do is I get back to them, and I say, look, here's what I'm seeing. Can we talk about this? And sometimes it's a phone call, but you can do it by email as well, or through a form or whatever. And like I say, sometimes say, well, yeah, we have this kind of, there are 5 different types of people, and quite often, and we have these 32 different product or service offerings, and the different offerings match different audience types. And I say, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, so, and this is classic advertising, marketing 101, is you cannot please all audience types. You cannot address everyone. As soon as you try to address everyone, you automatically write something that is boring to everyone, and that is not on the mark for anyone, because you're trying to please too many people. So what I say, and it doesn't matter whether I'm working for a local company, or I'm working for the New York Times or Encyclopedia Britannica or another client or whatever, I say, look, okay, you've got multiple audience types, you've got multiple offerings in terms of products and services. You tell me which 3 or 4 products or services that 80% of people are looking for when they come to your site. And sometimes they say, well, how did you know? And I know because it's always that way. It's always that way. Even if a company offers 50 different products or services, the 80% of the people who come to their site is generally 3 or 4 things that they're looking for. You missed the 20%, but if you can get 80%, so much the better. So again, if I find a creative brief where I think, whoa, hang on, I'm really not getting a clear idea of who they're trying to talk to, it's often because they're trying to talk to too many people about too many things in too many different ways. So then I get back and say, look, we can't do that. You're going to have very ineffective text, content, copy, whatever, if we try and address everyone and please everyone, because we'll end up pleasing nobody. So I say, let's prioritize this. Prioritize the audience type, prioritize the message type. If it's content that is pre-selling products and services, prioritize which products and services. So that's really, really important, because that then gives you the opportunity to write really good content or really good copy. When you're trying to please everyone, you'll never be able to do your best work. And your client will never be delighted, unless they're a little foolish. they'll never be delighted, because they can recognize that the copy or content is kind of flat and not very engaging and exciting. And that's often because it's trying to please too many audiences in too many different ways. Number 5, understand how the project is connected. I might get a client say, hey, can you write a page of content? And I say, well, sure I can. and they'll give me a brief and tell me what it's all about. It may not be as for a page of content, a single page. It may not be as extensive as Byron's brief, but in one form or another, I'll get some brief. And many of the questions that are in Byron's brief, I will, if need be, I will ask them in email or by phone. But what I want to do is I want to know how this is connected. And this is absolutely essential in the online world because everything is connected. Every page on a website is connected to one or more other pages. So if they say, hey, can you write a page of content or a series of 5 pages of content? I'll say, yes, absolutely. Can you show me how this fits in? From which page are people going to come to this? Which pages are they going to be sent to at the end of this page of content? How else is it connected? Are you going to be talking about this in Facebook? Is this going to be something that you're going to link to from your newsletter? Because I want to understand the context, within, and like I say, if it's print, it's a little different. It might be part of a broader campaign. But on a website, very specifically, every page will always be connected to other pages. So I want to make sure, for instance, if I'm doing a series of 5 content pages, and there is a primary page from which these will be linked, I'll say, well, let me see that page or tell me about that page, because I want to make sure that when people go from that page to one of my new pages of content I'm going to write, that there is a natural flow, that it makes sense, there is a connection there. So again, that can help me. It helps me write better content. And again, what it helps me do is avoid the circumstance where I submit my work and the client says, hey, it's great work, beautifully done, and you've absolutely followed the brief, and we cannot fault it. But man, we should have told you at the outset this is going to be part of a larger collection of connected pages. And although it's great, it really doesn't, our web team in-house doesn't feel happy because the tone is very different from the surrounding connected pages, or you've repeated stuff, or whatever. So part of this, as I'm going through this, you can see what I'm doing is I'm trying to set myself up for success. And I'm sometimes trying to fill in the gaps that a client may have made. Like they may not have thought, hey, we should tell Nick about how these pages fit into the website as a whole. They may forget to tell me, hey, we've already got the second little page where the links to these pages will be listed. And yes, Nick's tone and style and approach should match that connected page. So that's definitely something that I make sure that I do. Number 6, expand on the scope of every project. Now, again, this isn't always possible. It depends on how you're getting the work and the size of the project. But just as a freelancer tip, whenever I'm given a project, whether it's a sales page or a content page or whatever it is, doesn't matter, I always look for an opportunity to expand the scope of that project. So let's say someone asked me to write a sales page. I said, hey, great, I can do that, and I get the brief and everything, and we're talking about it. And I said, oh, by the way, how are you getting traffic to this page? And I'll say, oh, we're gonna do a series of emails. And I'll say, oh, who's writing those? Because I want to know how it's connected. And they say, well, we haven't worked that out yet. And then I say, well, perhaps I should do that, because if I write the emails, then I can make absolutely sure there is a perfect connection and flow from the email through to the sales page. And they may say, hey, thank you, yes, please do that. I might ask the question, how are you getting people here? And they say, oh, well, we're going to do some pay-per-click ads. And I say, well, have you got them done so I can look at it? And they say, no. And I say, well, why don't I do that? And I'll quote to them some reference about how some study, and they exist, that shows that the actual text you use within the pay-per-click ad, if the person who clicks it finds a very close connection, an immediate match on the landing page, this immediate relevance from clicking from the pay-per-click ad to the sales page, you can increase conversion. So what I'm doing is everything I do, I say, well, I wonder how this is connected, and I wonder whether I can also write those connected pieces. And I would say over the years, about 8 times out of 10, I succeed in expanding the scope of the original project the client had in mind. And given that as freelancers we have two types of time, we have billable time and unbillable time, I like to do that because it means that I'm not then having to spend unbillable time looking for new work. I already have the client, I already have a project, and any additional work I can get by expanding the scope of that existing project, that's gravy. That's extra work I'm getting without having to spend unbillable hours marketing myself. And I mean, well, sometimes it'll be, I can maybe add to my fee by 50% in this way or more. I mean, the biggest one was the insurance company came to me with like a $2,000 job, and over the following 3 months it expanded out into a $30,000 job. So that was simply saying, oh, well, hey, who's doing this or who's doing that or who's doing that? And then I was just going in and picking up more and more and more. So like I say, for some projects you don't have that opportunity. But where you do, certainly where you have a kind of open line of communication with your client and they're willing to listen to your questions and suggestions, then that is something that I always recommend that every freelancer think about and do, because it's a great way to make more money with very, very little extra effort. Before you get to the creative brief stage, prepare the ground, and again, this is where you have the opportunity. Understand the full scope of the engagement first. Like the creative, so if I go through the process, and again, this isn't the same for every freelancer in every circumstance, but I would typically, I get the interest, and then what I do with the client is I figure out, okay, tell me the scope of engagement of everything you want me to do. Then I submit an estimate, and then they give me the creative brief. All right. Now, sometimes if circumstances are a little different, and I just, I get that, hey, Nick, we want you to do this. Here's the creative brief, and the whole process begins in what in my mind is a midpoint, the creative brief. I always pause and I try and step back and I say, okay, thank you for the brief, I get that, but can we please just have a look at basically the scope of this engagement, precisely, make sure precisely you understand everything they want you to do. Because sometimes I've gone into jobs, and I know other freelancers who've done the same, where they were given a creative brief without really getting clarity on the full scope of the engagement as a whole. And they do it, and then they suddenly realize that they're doing it for an agreed amount of money, and then they suddenly realize that this project is actually bigger than what they anticipated, and you get into that awful business of, oh man, I can't go back and change my estimate now or the amount of money, but they keep asking me for more. So that's the other thing I do, is that when I get the creative brief, as well as all of this kind of scoping around the edges of it and trying to build up a kind of bigger picture and seeing what else is involved, I also want to make absolutely sure before I put pen to paper that we both understand precisely what it is I'm going to do for the money. Now, with Byron's template, hopefully that shouldn't often be a problem, because it should be fairly clearly described precisely what they want. And I'm not saying that clients are being deliberate or malicious in suddenly saying, oh, but I thought we agreed that you would also do such and such. Often it happens with an inexperienced client, and they don't really understand the process that well, and then they get surprised, and then you're surprised, and then everyone gets a little bit upset. So that is something, and I know it sounds like, I don't know whether it sounds obvious or whether it sounds unnecessary, but it's actually part of this is one of the key pillars to the way I've conducted my business as a freelancer for the last 30 years, is that before ever putting pen to paper, I get absolute total clarity on the full scope of the engagement before I begin, because I want to get into that without any worries in my mind. I want to look forward to writing where I've been asked to write. I want to understand absolutely and exactly the full scope of what I'm doing for the amount of money agreed, whether it's a very small job or a very large job. And I absolutely do not want upsets and surprises to end up in wasted time or the breaking up of relationships that really could have been very good. So that's the kind of end of my formal presentation. And so Byron, I don't know whether we're set up for any kind of Q&A or whether you want to kind of bring anything up based on what I said.
Yes, no, we are set up for Q&A. People have been diving in with some questions. Thanks very much for that. Keep the questions rolling for both Nick and I, and I'll get to them one by one. First of all, Nick, you put some contact information up here for people. You speak a lot. You write about writing. You have online courses. Where do you want people to go to get a hold of you if they have questions or interest in jumping on your fan wagon, as opposed to fan wagon?
If anyone wants to jump on my fan wagon, they can. Well, just start off with my website, nickusborne.com. If someone has specific questions that we don't address today, then I put my email address up there. People can contact me. I may not reply immediately, depends on what else I'm doing. I try not to disturb my day too much with email, although I do get to it. If you send me an email and you don't hear from me in a couple of days, then remind me. Just send me a second email. But yeah, no, I'm happy to answer emails. But if you want to read more of my stuff, then just go to nickusborne.com.
Terrific. So let's go into a couple questions here, Nick. And for starters, we had several questions about where's the wizard, how do I get to it, what's the scoop on the wizard. So we just launched the wizard today, basically. If you go to writeraccess.com and you look on the bottom of the page, there's like 4 gray boxes. One of them says resources, and then one of them has a link to the Creative Brief Wizard. It's a free tool, and you're going to love this because the tool, not only is it free, but when you fill out all the information, or when a customer fills out all the information, it bangs out not only a PDF that you can take with you as a result of whoever's filling out that data, but we also generate a page, a custom page, a unique URL for that creative brief that's emailed to you that you can then share with other people that are working on that project. So it's totally free. It's customizable. You know, once you create the creative brief, you can't change it. That's the only problem. It saves the information, but we haven't built an engine that would allow you to go in and edit it. So you have to be kind of careful about that, or just stop using that one and, you know, get the answers, copy and paste the answers from the page that you get over to another page or something. But so that's what we have for you guys today. So let's go to some other questions. Somebody wanted to know, somebody had a comment that I just wanted to read to you, Nick. They said, in our company, the stakeholder or person requesting creative services completes the creative brief document that contains standard questions. So that's a very common theme. I'd like you to comment on that, because I had somebody else that actually sent me an angry email during the webinar, which I thought was interesting, saying, Byron, you know, hang on, time out. The creative person shouldn't be filling this out. You know, the account person does this. You know, this is like, or maybe the customer possibly, but, you know, an account person that's trained on what to ask and when to ask it. And so they were very emotional and passionate about that mistake they thought I had made, which I love. Bring it on. But Nick, can you talk about that? I mean, you know, is it? I thought it was fascinating.
So you love it when people get pissed off with you?
Oh, it's terrific. It was wonderful. You know.
Well, my experience.
What's your take on that, though?
My experience is that the creative brief is generally created by someone on the client side or the agency side. I mean, as the writer, if somebody says, "Hey, Nick, for our product, can you write the creative brief?" I'll probably say, "Well, no, I can't. You know, you know it better than I do. You're on the client side. It's your product or service. That's something for you to fill out so I can learn from it." Yes. As for who fills it out, you know, I've worked with, let's say, in the agency side. I think sometimes it came from the client company. Sometimes it was put together by the account group. But as a copywriter or creative director, I'd sit there and I'd wait for the creative brief to be delivered to me as a resource for me. And like I've said in the slides, very often then I'll have follow-up questions if the circumstances allow, where I'm trying to fill in around the edges of that brief and address any questions I might have.
Yeah. I agree with that, and there's one slide that I had on here which I just wanted to show people quickly. It's tricky waters. I think that's a really good point that, who should develop it? I think I should rightfully take the writer off of this and the designer as well. The key point is that someone that understands the real context of that will work, that the work will exist. In other words, somebody really needs to understand this client's brand and their company and their competition, and I also think this person also needs to be inside the mind of the reader or the customer that is going to be engaging with this work.
Right. So often it'd be I'd get a creative brief from the brand manager or something like that, or whoever was responsible on the client side or the agency side. But yes, certainly as a writer, I wouldn't expect to write it because I don't know that. I'm looking for those answers. I don't have them yet.
Exactly. And it would take you many hours to get those answers,
Right. And then I might be completely wrong because the client can have all kinds of strategies and goals and approaches that I'm not privy to.
Exactly. So I'm glad we clarified that. So I think that good point there, and actually a very important point there. And so my bad. Hats off to somebody that has that question. I think it's a very good point. Well,
we'll have a group beat up Byron moment. Could you enjoy it?
You can leave that. Someone did write here, the author of the creator brief is irrelevant. Whoever pays for the work needs to approve the brief in blood. Right? So that's an interesting point. And that was a writer, Ian, that has a good point there. You see, writers want the creative brief. And they need the creative brief, but they need it to be written in blood. So when they create it, that was your point earlier, Nick. It's like, hey, I followed the creative brief here. You're wasting my time if someone didn't approve this creative brief that's actually going to be approving the copy.
Right. So that happens a couple of ways. One is that they were sloppy with the creative brief, or perhaps the wrong person wrote it. And the other is, like I say, the creative brief is actually at odds with what that person wants, because quite often the ultimate judgment of your work is more subjective than the client would be willing to admit. You can follow the brief, but then the client may just think, hey, I don't like it. Yeah, I get that you followed the brief, but I still don't like it. And that's a pain because you get into that awkward back and forth. But yes, the in blood thing, I require blood for the creative brief. I specifically require blood for clarity of the exact scope and limits of the engagement. I do not ever, as a freelancer, want to write the 5 pages and have a client say, oh, but I thought we agreed that you were going to do such and such as well. In fact, as a freelancer, when I don't have a kind of formal process put in place on the client side, I require from a client that what I do is there's a briefing either on paper or by phone or whatever. And then what I do is I write them an email, say, this is my understanding of the scope of this engagement. And then I go bang, 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 bang. I said, if this is correct, please email this back to me as a reply and confirm. I always get it in writing, in blood, that this is precisely what you're asking me to do. And it's not that I want to then go back and beat them over the head with it, because that doesn't help anyone. What I want to be sure is that they've thought it through carefully before I put pen to paper and start wasting anyone's time.
Someone had a quick question. Can you customize the Creative Brief Wizard? Not as of yet. However, there are several blank boxes, particularly in Step 6, that allow you to add various things to them. One of the things that we spent many hours working on this Creative Brief Wizard. To your point, Nick, there was a style and the tone and style section, which started out with about 10 questions on it with tone and style. And I'm like, strip it down more, down more. This is a brief. Make it simple. And what we decided in the end was a better replacement for all these different questions and fields was show me a sample. Enter a sample of work that is exemplary of what you are looking for.
Right.
I think
that'd be
nothing
great.
can be better than that. Right.
Also, I mean, if and when you can, I would love to see. Yeah, thank you, Nick, for sticking your nose into this. Like in your own words box.
Mm-hmm.
Like in addition to all the information that you shared above, please just in whatever 100, 200, 300 words, just in your own words, tell me what you're looking for. And like I say, very often. I've found the headline or I've found the key sentence with which to open something in that document of where they've written to me in their own words, what it's all, their take and their viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we got a comment from somebody that said, just a comment, I can see small PR firms using this service as we often retain freelancers in small PR firms. The process needs to be turnkey. We do not have time for an extensive process. I've used this service extensively. Oftentimes writers even will, with exemplary instructions, will miss directions. It can go both ways. And, spot on. That's why we thought this creative brief, particularly for ongoing projects. We have a lot of agencies, SEO firms, using Writer Access now, and we have something in there now, Nick, called Master Instructions, which can apply to like 10 or 20 things you're ordering. But
right.
we have an upload feature to Master Instructions now for this creative brief, because we think the Master Instructions should be fairly brief. Like, here's what I want, here's why I want it, here's some guidelines. But the creative brief is an add-on. It's an additional feature. It's more of an ongoing project. Again, like I have 20, 30 blog posts per month. Here's the overall creative brief of what I'm looking for, which is a summary of our creative strategy, blah, 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 right? So.
Oh, I would add one more thing that you just made me think of that I meant to mention during my presentation and didn't. I sometimes, when I read a creative brief, and I'm particularly looking at kind of demographics, psychographics, 60% female, 30% professional, that they'd like to go riding and play bingo and all that stuff. And after I've read through kind of 10 little snippets like that, I get kind of lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I do at that point is I think, okay, and I try to, and this is old advice for writers, is I just try to imagine one person who fits this scenario. And it may be somebody I know, it may be somebody I imagine, but I think, okay, this is, so I'm thinking of a 40-year-old male who likes outdoor, hey, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a cousin, maybe it's somebody I know. But I always, before I write, I just try to picture one person in my mind's eye. This is the person I'm writing to. It's, to me, hey, maybe other freelancers are different. But when I write, I find it impossible to write to an audience. Or rather, I don't write well if I write to an audience. Mm-hmm. I write well when I write to one person. So I always, when I'm going through all that, I'm really not a kind of demographics, psychographics, all that stuff kind of person. So what I'm trying to pull out of there is who is this person? And I truly try to imagine them in my mind's eye. And then that's who I write to.
Terrific insight. We had an all-important question, probably going to be our last one due to time constraints, but someone wanted to know how you price your services, Nick. How do you price your services? What is there a relation to industry standards, or is there Nick's own world of pricing? And how did you develop that world?
Oh, boy. Well, this is... All right, this is in a sense outside of what we're talking about now, but if you want to know the answer to that, it's kind of outside of the, if somebody asked me to write, 5 blog posts, there really is kind of almost like an industry upper and lower level. Clients know what they can expect to pay for a blog post or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's generally not been my kind of work. I don't have an hourly rate. I always price by the project, and I practice what I would describe as value pricing. So,
Nick, we may have lost you.
yeah, you still, sorry, my headset and my phone all just fell away and I fell off my head.
The pricing issue worked you up. You got all worked up about it.
I know. All right, so value pricing. And like I say, you can't do this with every, certainly not with any kind of boilerplate repeat stuff.
Yeah.
But here's how value pricing works, because I think you could find this interesting. There are two sides to value pricing. One is the perceived value in the client's mind. All right, so I'm going to give you two 500-word projects. One is to rewrite the About page on a website, 500 words. One is to write a sales page for a product or service on a website, 500 words. The About page, the perceived value to the client is very low. They perceive it as an expense. They're not going to generate any income from the About page. It's just that it's out of date and they want it rewritten. It's an unfortunate expense and they don't want to pay much. So they might pay me $200 or $300 to rewrite their About page. The sales page, same number of words, they think, wow, if Nick can increase conversion rates by 6%, we'll generate an extra $50,000 this quarter. So I might say to them, instead of $200, I might say $2,000, I might say $5,000. And they'll say yes, because they perceive the additional value of that page. So that's one side of the equation of what is the perceived value to the client. The other part of the equation when it comes to value pricing is what is their perception of the value that I have? How am I perceived in their eyes? So if someone comes to me through a Google search, finds my freelance website, which isn't really kind of up anymore, but when I was doing 100% freelancing, if they just do a Google search and they find my website among many others, they come to mind, they've never heard of me, they don't know who I am, their perceived value of me is low. I'm nothing special in their eyes, which means that I really can't charge a premium price because I'm a stranger. If, however, somebody comes to me and says, hey, Nick, I've heard you speak at a couple of conferences, I read your book, and I've bought copies for everyone in our marketing department, and I've been reading your articles since 1997, then I know that they have a very high perception of my value, which means not only can I charge more, but I have to charge more. And I'll give you a quick example of this. I once estimated for a job. It was a fairly substantial job. And it was exactly that. Someone who came to me who had been looking for an opportunity to work with me. They wanted it to be me, all right? They said because of the constraints within the company, we're putting this out to tender to 4 different writers, but you're the guy. I put in my estimate, and like I say, it was a substantial job. I put in like an estimate for $15,000 for this project. It was a big project. I waited a few days, didn't hear anything, got back to him after about a week, and I said, hey, so what's happening? And he said, awkward, Nick. You didn't get the job. And I said, oh, which kind of surprised me, because I thought I was a shoo-in from what he was saying. And I said, well, can you tell me why not? And he said, well, your estimate came in at about half what we expected. So I estimated for 15. They expected 30. And when they saw what were in their eyes, the low estimate, they thought, oh, he can't be as good as we thought he was. So value pricing is really interesting that way. And I know not every project is a $15,000 project. I've done plenty of $200 projects and things like that. But in that case, I blew it because I misread the perception of value they saw in me. Mm-hmm. So that's, if you want to know what I do, like I say, I don't have an hourly rate, or I may privately have one that I kind of check in on to make sure that I'm using my time wisely. I don't compete with other copywriters. I don't care what the going rate is. I don't care what competing copywriters charge. And if somebody says to me, oh, Nick, well, we were talking to Jack, the copywriter, and he said he can do it, I say, fine. I mean, if you want to work with Jack, that's fine by me. I don't want to work with clients who haggle with me. I want to work with clients who get my value and want to work with me. So it's a very different pricing model from, if I were, writing lots of content one page at a time, because then I'm kind of constrained in a way by industry norms. So in that case, I would stick within those norms. I'd say, hey, well, the going rate for this kind of content is X, and hey, I've built myself a bit of a reputation, so maybe I can inch that up a bit. But yeah, now the other quick thing on pricing is that, again, if I'm not constrained by this is the going rate, if I'm going to set the estimate, is one, I never ever give an estimate over the phone because I always give it too low. Secondly, I never ever submit an estimate within 12 hours of being asked to, because I want to write it on a piece of paper, let it sit, then look at it and change it and make sure that I'm absolutely confident that I've got it right before I send it off. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear. But value pricing is if you look at freelancers, whether they're writing content or copy or they're providing other services for web writing or optimization or whatever, you look at the top performers in the industry, and you will find almost exclusively that none of them have an hourly rate, and they all, in one way or another, practice value pricing. Value pricing also can be affected by the size of a company. I could do 500 words for a local company, 500 words for New York Times. New York Times will pay me 10 times more, and they expect to because they're a big company and they're used to cutting big checks.
First of all, pricing is without question the hottest topic amongst our pool of writers, and we, ironically, this month, in the month of May, we are revolutionizing the industry, and in June we will launch a new pricing formula for the projects being put through the system. So we are going to have a huge launch on this topic. We would love to get you thinking about that a little bit and see if
I can talk forever about pricing.
Yeah, well, this is going to be an interesting one the first week in June, Nick. I'd love to have you talk about this. The challenge to set it up is the following. So all of these online, and by the way, we're probably going to just get playing cut off. This is the longest webinar we've actually ever had, which is kind of interesting. We usually stop this about 15 minutes ago, so we may get cut off in a minute, but I know that 60 to 70% of the people are still gripped on and listening to this conversation now, which is great. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And I think in the end here, it's so intense about pricing. Couple of methodology, just a couple of thoughts to put in everyone's mind to set this up for next month. Number one, these online models are very difficult. There's 5,000 writers in our pool. It's standing out from the pack is difficult. Customers come to the writer access model and other models like ours thinking, oh, big pool, cheap, this will be great. We'll crowdsource this out. We'll get really good writers to work really cheaply, right?
Right.
Like, we get that. We understand their background and why they're doing that and why they think they could get that, but it doesn't make it right, right? So what we're doing is we're sort of coming up with a slightly more complicated pricing model, which will allow customers to, price things differently. So they'll actually be able to send things out to the crowd. We're going to call it a crowd order. And it will go out to the crowd. There'll actually be a discount from the standard rate. The standard rate will be the price per word methodology, which we're currently using right now. No change in the price structure, so we're a safe harbor there for people. The way they're using writer access, it can continue. But the next level up beyond that, we're changing, and it's called premium orders. We'll talk about that a little bit, and that's where a customer pays an additional industry rate bonus, if you will, an increased of industry standard, which is what you were referring to, Nick, on, people know ranges of blog posts. It could be X to Y. Well, we're going to show those ranges that are industry standards, and then also have another way to raise the quality level of a content asset, and that is to contract editing services. In other words, a second set of eyes looking at content. again, all within the premium order option for people. So if customers are looking for higher content, hey, you get what you pay for, people. Either do it with an additional editor support or pay an additional premium, which is industry standards rates, which is beyond what the standard pay-per-word order rates are, which we need to have to compete with some of these other models. But then there's a fourth one, and I'm going to save that as a secret sauce for everyone showing up next month. But we have a fourth option that's even above the premium, which is driven more towards what you were describing as a value proposition, and that's really more one-to-one negotiations without saying much more. That I believe will be revolutionary and is actually using some technology to facilitate that relationship. So tune in next week, and I'm also, just so everyone on the phone knows, I'm working with Nick to try to get the response and the reaction from webinars like this. We want to know from writers, was this valuable? Was this informational? Do you want course material? Do you want a guide to help you raise your star levels and your proficiency? What are the wants and needs of the writers in our community? And what help could we get from someone like Nick, who you can see is a real pro? So that's what we're up to here at Writer Access. Hope everyone tuned in. Nick, thanks a lot for being on the presentation today.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'm sorry if I was too wordy and stole too much time.
We'll look for other venues, Nick, to get you opportunities to talk with people, but it's all good. It was a great presentation today. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. Please give me feedback. I'm dying to get feedback on that wizard. Please go try it. Kick the tires. Send me an email. Send me a tweet if you would and let me know what you thought of this presentation. I've been gathering a lot of my tweets, feedbacks for these actual webinars for like 32 webinars I've done now. So send me a tweet on how you thought the webinar went. I'd really appreciate that. Send me an email to Byron at Idea Launch if you have any thoughts on the Creative Brief Wizard. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Nick, thanks you. And until next.
Thank you for asking me.
Right on. I hope we can bring you in a loop next week and next month, rather, to talk about pricing. You're spot on, perfect for that. So thanks, everyone, for listening in.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay.
See you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.